again, Your Honor, look at the reality of what happened there. Look at the horror. I recall that you looked in the compartment of one of those police cars out there on scene when we were at the that warehouse, what the heck is called, the loading docks. And I was struck how narrow the seating is. So can you imagine being in there and the horror and the terror that you would have in shooting through the windshield when your partner's shooting as well? And what impact does that have on your sensibilities, on your ability to hear? What's going through one's mind when one's firing a gun through a windshield? What would cause a kid from St. Raphael's and St. Ed's who served our country in the military, who has a family, what would make him want to shoot through the windshield at another human being? Could it be that he was being shot at? Could it be that he reasonably perceived that the occupants of the Malibu were shooting at him? That's what all the other officers perceived. That's what Officer Brelo perceived, Your Honor. And there was nothing that the occupants of that vehicle did to dissuade them from that cruel reality that night. So Officer Brelo fires, he gets out of his vehicle, he gets behind 238. They want to say that he's calculating, okay, I got to save my gun jammed because therefore I have less bullets I fired, so therefore I won't have any trouble in this case because, oh, I fired too many times. Is that what we're to believe? All the other officers misjudged. There's time perceptions, time distortions rather. They all misperceived how many shots that they fired. They all misperceived how long this took. But the reality of the experience, Your Honor, is that when the gunshots are flying under nighttime conditions, with all of these sirens going, with all of these lights flashing, the reality is that that's the last thing in your mind. You're reacting, you're trying to save your life. And that's what he was doing. And anything else you've heard in this courtroom, Your Honor, is 20/20 hindsight. As Officer Cibola told you, you can't train for this. This isn't, the Cleveland Browns running an off-tackle play or running a pass play with a couple different options. When the bullets are flying, some people stand and some people run for cover. Doesn't make them cowards, but that's a pretty horrifying reality, and that's a pretty horrifying choice one has to make. Officer Brelo did it, and he reacted instinctively. And why does a person who has values, why does a person that believes in things shoot 49 times? Your Honor, I respectfully submit to you that to ask the question is to answer it. And it could be summed up in one word: fear. Officer Brelo was scared to death because of the reality that presented itself that began 20 minutes prior to that and led up to the events in that parking lot. He fired his weapon not because of the color of their skin, not because he was upset with them that they put the police on a pursuit. He fired because he was terrified. He thought the occupants of the Malibu were shooting at him. And that's what he felt when he was shooting over the light bar of 238. He was terrified. He was shooting at the people who he felt were shooting at him. Whether he mistakenly believed them to have a weapon or whether he mistakenly perceived movement where none existed because they were dead already. And he continued to fire his weapon, Your Honor, till he believed the threat was over and until he recalled that he was then taking the keys out of the ignition, putting the car in park, and then putting the keys on the windshield. So the threat wasn't over, and it wasn't perceived to be over, and Cibola told you that, Your Honor, when he came into court. He raised his right hand, and he swore that after he fired his 4 rounds from the 2 locations that he testified to, and after he saw an officer standing on the hood, he came around and was trying to fire again. So what does that tell us about what Officer Sobolik perceived? That the threat truly was not over. He was trying to fire again. And we also know that Mr. Casares, Your Honor, besides having issues with leaving one's feet, testified unequivocally that if Officer Brelo fired all of his rounds from behind the rear, behind the trunk of 238, they would have been objectively reasonable. Not my words, Your Honor, his. And that's what he said. So we go from all those shots being objectively reasonable in terms of the number of shots fired and the reasonable perception that those would have been justified. All of a sudden, because Officer Brelo in that setting made an instinctive judgment to jump up on the trunk and then onto the hood, that he went from being justified to being not justified. I submit to you that that's a distinction without a difference, and I submit to you that this whole notion about officer safety is completely different from the issue of whether or not illegal force was used. The fact that Officer Brelo made a split-second decision and endangered his life is not evidence whatsoever that his use of force was illegal.